If I am married to Alice, and I'm getting high in the infatuation stage, which is stage 1 of limerence, where that I want to be with Sally Sue because we've had this interaction with each other and these emotions keep getting more intense, and I'm going close to phase 2, which is the crystallization. And understand, these are not like clear-cut demarcations, like, oops, he just went into phase 2 at 12:30 a.m. this morning. No, it's not quite that clear. It's more nebulous. But Fisher went ahead to say that she and her colleagues, remember, she's the one who is the anthropological biologist or maybe a biological anthropologist. Actually, I don't remember which order it is. She and her colleagues who do the studies where they put people into the fMRIs and et cetera, and then ask lots of questions after that, they actually came up with a list of things that are characteristic of people who are in limerence. Now, I'm going to paraphrase these things so that, it's a little easier to understand because as social scientists and scientists, they tend to write like scientists. So let me just kind of put it more in lay language, if I may. One is that the limerent person tends to set the LO, the limerent object, the person they're madly in love with, apart from the rest of the world. It sets its sights on one and only one object of adoration. And so if a guy has 3 different women out there, he's not in limerence with all 3. Or if a woman's got 6 guys out there, she is not in limerence with all 6. Limerence can only be for one person at the time. It's impossible, according to the research of Fisher and hers and her colleagues, and I'll say based on all the thousands of people we work with, that she's absolutely right. It's impossible to experience limerence with more than one person at a time. Now, another thing is that the limerent sees the LO, and I'll quit saying limerent object just for the sake of clarity. We're talking about the person that he or she's madly in love with. The limerent sees the LO only in a positive light, and the negative becomes invisible. Even the things associated with that person, like letters or words or events they attended together, are cherished and adored as being special because they're associated with the LO. We refer to that as the halo effect, which can start happening even a little bit early in phase 1 or infatuation. But when they get to crystallization, it's fascinating because in crystallization, they literally, because of this halo effect. Well, let me explain that. A halo effect means if I see one good thing in you, I tend to think everything about you is good. So if I like my singer who plays on the album I bought that I love, boy, that told my age, didn't it? On the DVD, if I bought the videos, or on the iTunes, whatever it might be now, if that's my favorite singer, then whenever he or she makes some kind of a comment about politics, I tend to think, wow, that's brilliant. That's the halo effect. If I see this one thing about you as being outstandingly good, I see everything about you as being great. So what happens here with the halo effect in limerence is, because I see the parts about you that I'm attracted to, the parts that drew me into this strong emotional relationship with you, I think everything about you is positive. And so they discount the negatives. In the silly illustration we made earlier, she doesn't care that he was in prison for murder for many, many years. He's not like that anymore. And so because of this halo effect, I can't see the flaws in him and her, and no matter what anybody else says, I will not. Isn't that fascinating? To the point where that sometimes people will tell us about their spouse who is in limerence with somebody else and will say things like, she's ended like 6 different marriages. And my husband says, don't believe all those rumors, when he was the one back in the day that used to talk about how bad she was. One of my friends, he was a celebrity, so I have to leave him unnamed. I'd leave him unnamed anyway. His wife got involved with a guy that, as far as we know, based on things that we were actually able to put together that were very, very strong evidence, that was the 15th marriage that this particular man had caused to come to an end. And yet my friend, who was married to the wife, who was number 15, couldn't see it at all. Couldn't see it at all. So this halo effect is, man, there's nothing wrong with the other person. I don't care what you say. You don't get it. You don't see it. To the point where that when lady we were involved with who was actually in her town where she lived, quite a well-known figure, outstanding member of First Baptist Church, had been the high school cheerleader captain back in the day, had gone to college, come back to live there, married to a prestigious man in that community, etc. Left her husband to go be with a man that she was in limerence in, who lived in a rusted-out mobile home. And I'm not against mobile homes, so misunderstand. In a rusted-out mobile home, because he was such a failure at everything he had done in life, he had no money. And so he lived out there with no heat. He lived out there with no air conditioning. And when I tried to ask her about that, do you think this might be indicative of the way this guy lives generally? Saw no flaws in it whatsoever. So in part of that crystallization, Fisher writes about it, and I'll guarantee you we've seen it a gazillion times, is that they only see the person in a positive light. And the other part of that is that anything associated with that person, the letters, the words, the events, are cherished. I made a foolish mistake earlier. This was many years ago before I knew nearly as much about it as I do now, where a friend of mine who was a minister and got involved with a woman in his church and had been caught, was terminated, and I was trying to help him save his marriage, even though he wasn't really sure at that point if he wanted to or not. And in the course of one of our conversations, he said, I've got a safety deposit box that's got little letters that she wrote and notes and a little trinket that she bought me for one time. I naively said, okay, well, to help you get past this, what we need to do right now is go to the bank, you get that safety deposit box out, and we're going to destroy those things. I'm surprised I'm still alive. I mean, he went into an explosion of anger and let me know if I even suggested such a thing again, he would thrash me bountifully. Why? It's limerence. Everything associated with that person becomes special. A third one that Fisher and her colleagues noticed was that the limerence life becomes crazy. It gets crazy from a physical and an emotional point of view. So they typically experience things such as euphoria, energy surges, but then insomnia and lost appetite and abrupt mood swings and sometimes even rapid heartbeats. Remember I said in that phase 2, it's still not a straight line like a plateau or a mesa. It's still a squiggly line that goes up and down. It's an emotional roller coaster. They may experience anxiety attacks, panic attacks, and may even become afraid when they're with the limerent object, although, by the way, that's not the case as it gets even stronger. On some of the things I've seen online, they say, you'll always see, one way you know it's limerence is because you feel that kind of a rapid change in emotion when you're with him or her, but you understand that as they get deeper into the limerence, those things change. There's still a degree of fear. You see, what Fisher and her colleagues found was this. What's happening in the brain, and there's several chemicals involved, I'll just mention 2 of them, is that a person in a limerent state has an increase in dopamine. That is an ecstasy chemical. I understand it's even kind of like a cousin to cocaine, but it's being made by your own brain. And so there's ecstasy. And so you have this amazing sense of euphoria. At the same time, there's a decrease in serotonin. Now, serotonin does a lot of things. One thing it does, though, is to help calm you down. The less serotonin you have, the greater likelihood of having emotional mood swings and depression and anxiety attacks. That's why there's a whole realm of pharmaceuticals out there called SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. And what these things do is help you have more serotonin in your brain because it helps to calm you down. People in a limerent state have more dopamine and less serotonin. And so fear actually is a factor. And anytime you have fear that the other person might not wind up with you, it increases your passion for that person. In that sense, fear intensifies passion. So if you think about it, part of this euphoria and then misery has to do with the fact that, well, she's happy with me today. Things are going to be wonderful. We're going to be together. Oh, today she doesn't look like she's happy with me at all. Is this thing going to work out? Am I going to wind up with her? Or things are working really well. We're able to see each other and people don't even know where we are. And it's not just sitting out in the park in a table. It has evolved to holding hands, which evolved to hugging, which evolved to kissing, which evolved to, and by the way, it doesn't always evolve to the next state, but most of the time it does, which evolved into a situation where we are seeing each other in a hotel or motel or a friend's house who's helping us cover, and we're making love to each other there. And because of all the intense chemicals in the brain, the sensation is, oh, I have never had sex like this before. This is amazing. And they truly do believe that. Part of it is the fact that it's a new partner. You understand that if you're making love to a person for more than 2 years, you go into a thing called sexual habituation, which means sex can get a little dull. In long-term marriages that are happy and great, at least half the time, if not more, sex is just so-so because of sexual habituation. So part of it's the fact that you're in a brand new relationship. The other part has to do with these brain chemicals. And people think, this is amazing. I'll never be able to match this anywhere ever again. Why didn't I have this before? This is where I'm meant to be. Now realize that if you have a husband or wife who is in limerence or been in limerence, you didn't like any of what I just said. But I believe you'd rather that I tell you the truth than to lie to you. Number 4, according to Fisher and her colleagues, in times of adversity, the limerent feels even stronger emotions for and attraction to the LO. So if they get caught, there are occasions where people get caught and all of a sudden a husband or wife realizes, oh my goodness, I'm going to lose my children. I might lose my position. In other words, the company's going to fire me because she also works here. Or I work for a church and they're certainly going to fire me because they don't tolerate their personnel being involved in adultery or whatever it might be. And so there are times when adversity can actually jar them into being awake and changing things. But it's much more common that adversity actually pushes the two of them together. It becomes you and me against the world. And they'll stand against nearly anybody. And it's kind of interesting at this point that sometimes a person will even stand against his own children. I talked to a man whose grown children said, Dad, if you leave our mother and divorce her to go be with this woman, this guy, by the way, was in his 60s and the other woman was 35. If you go be with her, we're not going to talk to you anymore. You're not going to see your grandchildren. And we have nothing to do with you because everything you taught us in life, you're now living in violation of. And rather than that shocking him and waking him up where he wanted to go back and be what he was before, it just pushed him right into the other person's arms. And so quite often the adversity can push the person the other way. Now, let me give a caveat here. We do have something online called an intervention document. If you go to marriagehelper.com, marriagehelper.com, and the search feature at the top of the page, you type in intervention, you can download a PDF. It's like 35 or 40 pages long. There's also 2 45-minute audios there you can listen to where I explain it in greater detail. And you might be thinking, okay, you just said if in times of adversity it pushes them together, yet you're trying to tell me that sometimes you actually do an intervention which might threaten the other person? That's right. Understand, though, that the short-term reaction to the intervention might push the person or your loved one toward the other person. I actually based that on the intervention methodology that's used in Alcoholics Anonymous. I mean, you understand who the experts. And they say that it typically is the 5th intervention or afterwards when they can get a person who is an alcoholic to finally get the help he or she needs. And so when I say this, you need to understand that, yeah, intervention is still valid, even though in the short term, adversity might push the two of them together. Number 5, the limerent may obsessively think about the LO up to 85% of the waking hours. Psychologists refer to this as intrusive thinking. Number 5, that was number 5. Number 6, the limerent typically exhibits signs of emotional dependency on the relationship with the LO, including possessiveness, jealousy, fear of rejection, and separation anxiety. In other words, I get so focused on you, my LO,